Welcome to Synthesis. I'm your host, Kingy Gilbert. Think of synthesis as weaving a tapestry of individual threads of knowledge. Although they're distinct, when woven together, they create a larger picture. For example, in this first episode, called The Dragon and the Eagle, A Dangerous Dance, it explores the complex relationship between the US and China. The research queries are initiated by me, Kingy Gilbert, but I use various AI tools to do the summarization. Finally, as a human, I decide the priorities and what the focus points are. The voices are supplied by Google's Notebook LM software. Let me know what you think of this convergence in AI and human-led investigation.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to really dig deep into something fascinating: vulnerabilities and opportunities facing China and the US as global superpowers. We've got economic data, cultural analysis, geopolitical reports, the whole shebang. And we're going to break it all down into key insights that you can actually use.
It's really amazing stuff, you know. We always hear about China's rise or America's decline, but today we're going way beyond the headlines, like really looking at how complex it all is.
Exactly. We'll be looking at some pretty surprising trends in economic power and consumer behavior, and then the very different ways these two countries look at diversity, plus that critical role Taiwan's semiconductor industry plays in the global power balance.
It's a bit like high-stakes chess, wouldn't you say? Each country making moves, trying to secure their place on the world stage, and as we'll see, the ending is definitely not written yet.
So let's start with something everyone listening can relate to: consumer markets. China's economy is booming, we all know that, but the US still has this surprisingly strong position.
Absolutely. Like, you might be surprised to hear the U.S. consumer market makes up a huge 34% of global household consumption. That's over 3 times China's 10%. It means American consumers have this incredible purchasing power, influencing trends and shaping global markets.
So even with China growing so fast, U.S. consumers are still the ones to watch.
For sure. And there's another interesting difference. The U.S. economy is really reliant on consumer spending. It's a whopping 68 to 70% of their GDP. In China, it's only about 38%.
Okay, so what's that telling us about their approaches?
It shows a lot about their economic strategies. China's growth has been driven by investment and exports, while the U.S. has focused on domestic demand and consumption.
Makes sense. But here's something really interesting: savings rates. There's a huge difference. Americans only save about 5 to 6% of their income. But in China, over 30%. Why is that?
That difference says so much about how cultures view things like consumption, financial security, even the role of government. In the U.S., it's all about immediate gratification, individual responsibility for financial well-being.
And in China, it's more traditional to save for the future.
Precisely. And China's government also plays a big role. They encourage high savings rates with policies and financial incentives. It's a different approach, and it has implications for how businesses target consumers in each market.
Right. If you're a company trying to figure out these giants, it's not just selling a product. You got to get those cultural nuances of how people spend and save.
Absolutely. Speaking of culture, let's shift to something else impacting both countries: their growing multi-ethnic populations.
Okay, so the U.S. has always been this melting pot of cultures. How does that impact its internal dynamics, and what does it mean for businesses?
Well, the U.S. is going through a big demographic shift. People of color make up 40% of the population now, and they were the sole reason for population growth between 2010 and 2020. Get this: by 2045, no single racial or ethnic group will be the majority. It's a big change to the fabric of the country.
Wow, a truly multi-ethnic America. How does this tie back to our deep dive?
Major implications, both inside the country and outside. Internally, the U.S. is wrestling with things like social cohesion and racial equity. That can affect political stability and economic opportunity. Externally, it means a consumer market with tons of cultural preferences. Businesses have to adapt their marketing to reach everyone.
So it's not just about seeing diversity. It's about understanding the nuances of each group and how to connect with them.
You got it. Companies ignoring these shifts are taking a big risk. The multicultural consumer market is already huge, and it's predicted to hit almost $7.5 trillion by 2026.
That's a ton of money.
Yeah.
So you've got the U.S. navigating this multi-ethnic landscape, and then there's China. How does their approach to diversity compare?
Well, officially, China says they have 56 ethnic groups, but the truth is, Han Chinese make up over 91% of the country. They talk about multiculturalism, but it's more about control and assimilation than embracing differences.
Interesting. The U.S. has businesses scrambling to adapt to this diverse consumer market, while China's focus is on keeping a unified cultural identity.
Exactly. And this difference isn't just an idea. It impacts everything from internal politics to economic strategies and how they interact with the world.
Okay, so we've got a foundation for understanding some key differences between the U.S. and China in their economies and how they approach diversity. Now, let's get into this Taiwan situation. You said it's like a chess piece in this rivalry. What makes Taiwan so important?
Taiwan has this unique spot in global tech, especially with semiconductors. This tiny island nation is home to TSMC, the world's top maker of advanced chips. They're crucial for everything: smartphones, laptops, military tech, AI systems, you name it.
So Taiwan basically has a monopoly on the most advanced chips in the world.
That's right. And here's the thing. TSMC produces a whopping 90% of those cutting-edge semiconductors. That makes Taiwan incredibly valuable to both the U.S. and China.
I see where this is going. The U.S. needs those chips for its tech industry, and China sees them as crucial to their own ambitions. Taiwan's stuck in the middle of a power struggle.
You got it. It's a tricky situation, and it's why the U.S. is so worried about China's intentions towards Taiwan. They see it as a weakness, a choke point that could mess up global supply chains and cripple their tech sector.
So what's the U.S. doing about this?
Well, they're trying to reduce their reliance on Taiwan. Like, they passed the CHPS and Science Act.
Hold on. For those who don't know, what is the CHPS Act? What does it actually do?
It's a big law that wants to boost semiconductor production here in the U.S. It gives billions of dollars for research, development, and manufacturing of chips right here. The idea is to depend less on Taiwan and have a secure supply of these vital components.
So it's a long-term plan to catch up with Taiwan's dominance in chip making.
Exactly. But it's not just about the economy. It's national security, too. The U.S. wants access to the best chips, even if things get worse with China.
Wow, the stakes are really high. Controlling Taiwan's semiconductor industry could totally change the power balance.
Absolutely. And that leads us to a big question. Who actually holds the balance of power right now? So, who holds the balance of power right now? It's complicated, but let's break down the strengths and weaknesses of each side. Maybe that'll give us some insight.
Okay, let's start with the U.S. We talked about their huge consumer market and advantages in tech, for now at least. What else makes them strong?
Well, they still have the strongest military, right? Global reach, advanced tech, the whole 9 yards. And the financial system is stable, influential. The dollar's still the world's reserve currency, which gives them a lot of pull. Oh, and don't forget soft power. American culture, movies, music, fashion, tech. It has a massive impact globally.
So even with the challenges, the U.S. is still a major force.
Without a doubt. But like any superpower, they have weaknesses too. We talked about semiconductors and relying on Taiwan, but there's also that growing political divide, rising inequality, and the national debt keeps going up.
So those internal issues could weaken their global position.
Exactly. If they can't deal with those effectively, it could really hurt their long-term strength and stability.
Okay, I get it. Now, China. Rapid economic growth, expanding influence with things like the Belt and Road, big investments in their military. It seems like they're on the rise.
They're definitely a power to watch, no doubt, but they have unique challenges that could slow them down. We talked about their struggle to become more consumer-driven, and then there's the aging population, environmental issues, even some internal political tensions.
You mentioned a consumption slump earlier. What does that mean for China's ambitions?
Well, basically, China needs people spending more to keep the economy growing. But lately, Chinese consumers are getting more cautious. They're saving more, spending less. That could really put the brakes on their economic engine.
So even though their middle class is growing, they're not spending like people thought they would.
Yeah, that's the thing. There are a few reasons for it. Some say it's the uncertainty from COVID and the downturn in the property market. Others think it's a deeper cultural change. Like, younger generations care more about experiences and financial security, not just buying stuff.
So a mix of economic factors and changing values.
Exactly. And it's a big problem for China's leaders. If they want that economic growth to continue, they need to find ways to encourage people to spend more. Maybe address income inequality, improve social safety nets, or find ways to boost consumer confidence.
Makes sense. So we've looked at strengths and weaknesses for both the U.S. and China. Now let's look ahead a bit. In 5 years, where do you see this balance of power going?
Predicting the future is tough. But based on what we've talked about, we can make some educated guesses, right? Short term, I think the U.S. will probably stay on top globally. Their military, their lead in certain tech areas, and a strong financial system all put them in a good spot.
So the next 5 years will probably be more of the same, with the U.S. ahead.
Probably. But that doesn't mean China's just waiting around. They'll keep going after their goals, expanding influence through things like the Belt and Road, putting money into AI and quantum computing, and building up their military.
So it's this back and forth, with both sides trying to outmaneuver each other.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The next 5 years will be about getting into the best position, using each other's weaknesses, and holding on to their own strengths.
That makes sense. Let's zoom out even more. What about 10 years from now? Will China overtake the U.S. as the top superpower?
The big question. Honestly, it's really hard to say. A lot depends on whether China can overcome those internal issues. If they get people spending, fix the demographic problems, and keep things politically stable, they'll be in a great spot to challenge the U.S. in the next decade.
But if they struggle with those things,
then their rise might not be as dramatic. They could face slower growth, unrest within the country, or even have to change their global ambitions.
So it's not a sure thing that China will definitely surpass the U.S.
Not at all. There are so many factors, and it's all still up in the air.
What about the U.S.? What can they do to stay in the lead for the next 10 years?
They got to tackle those internal problems that could weaken them, reduce political division, fix income inequality, and make smart investments in education, infrastructure, and innovation. Oh, and finding a solution for semiconductors, either making more at home or diversifying their supply chain.
So it all comes down to adapting and evolving.
Exactly. The world is changing fast, and the U.S. can't just sit back and relax.
Both countries have their work cut out for them if they want to stay on top. What are the key trends you'll be watching over the next 10 years?
I'll be looking at how China tries to get people spending more and how they're doing with tech like AI and quantum computing. Also, how they handle their demographic problems and any political pressures within the country.
And what about the U.S.?
I'll be watching how they deal with their political divisions, how they invest in things like innovation and education, and how their foreign policy adapts to a world where China's influence is growing. The decisions these two superpowers make over the next decade will have a huge impact on the entire world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Economic power, consumer behavior, the challenges of diversity, the importance of Taiwan, and how the balance of power might shift. What's the main thing you take away from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is how complex, dynamic, and important the relationship between the U.S. and China is. It's not just about one winner and one loser. It's this multifaceted competition that will shape the 21st century in huge ways.
And for everyone listening, these global trends actually affect your lives, from what you buy to job opportunities, even the stability of your investments. So stay informed, think critically, and be ready to adapt to a world that's changing fast.
Well said. Now, before we finish up, there's one more thing I think we should talk about. The rise of other power structures, specifically the BRICS nations.
Oh yeah, we can't forget about BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, plus some new members this year. They're making a splash globally. But how do they fit into this whole U.S.-China thing?
Well, China sees BRICS as a way to challenge the current global order, the one they see as dominated by the U.S. and its allies. They want to use BRICS to push their own interests, build economic partnerships, and form alliances with other up-and-coming economies.
So it's a way for them to gain influence and maybe create an alternative to the Western-led system.
Exactly, and it's something the U.S. is definitely keeping an eye on. It really adds a whole other level to the global power struggle, right? You've got these two superpowers head-to-head, and then this group of nations trying to shake things up.
A lot to take in. So what does this all mean looking forward?
It tells us the next decade is going to be even more unpredictable and full of change. We could end up in a world that's more divided with these competing power centers and, honestly, a bigger risk of conflict. Or maybe it goes the other way, more cooperation, where countries find ways to work together on the big stuff like climate change, poverty, those kinds of things.
So the future is still wide open.
Totally. And that's what makes it so exciting. We're at this turning point in history, and the choices we make now will impact the world for generations.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. I feel like I understand this whole U.S.-China thing way better now, how complex it is and how it affects everything.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, we've only scratched the surface. There's always more to learn, more to question, and more to talk about.
Exactly. For everyone listening, what are your takeaways? What surprised you? What questions do you still have?
And the big one, how do you see these global trends impacting your own life, your career, even your investments? It's not just some far-off political thing. It has real consequences. Think about the stuff you buy, the companies you support, even the skills you might need to learn to do well in the job market as it changes.
It's about connecting these global shifts to your own life, right?
Exactly. And one last thought. Are there vulnerabilities and opportunities we haven't even touched on? Like climate change? The fact that resources are getting scarcer, the power of ideas and cultures mixing.
All those things could really change how this US-China thing plays out.
And the ultimate question, do we end up with one superpower on top? Or is there a way to have a world where power is spread out more evenly among different countries and groups?
Now, that is the question. And like we've seen today, the answer is far from clear. But one thing's for sure, the next few years will be crucial in deciding what that future looks like.
So stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions. The future is being shaped right now. If you're paying attention, you'll be in a better position to handle the challenges and grab the opportunities that come up.
I couldn't agree more. That's a wrap on our deep dive into the US and China. Hope you found it interesting and made you think.
It's been great exploring these complex issues with you.
To everyone listening, keep learning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep thinking critically. The world needs more curious minds like yours.